You know, people found out that Ellen was mean, and all these people came out and said, Ellen's actually a fucking bitch. She lost everything. She fell apart, disappeared, because people found out that this character that she was portraying in a half an hour on a television show is not really who she was, you know, but I hadn't already known that. My buddy Greg, who was one of her writers, was like, she's a piece of shit.
I stay grateful and I try to stay humble, and I think that I pay attention to what is important and what is real.
She was toxic to be around. She wouldn't look at you in the eye. She was very dismissive.
Speaking about claims of a toxic work environment.
I've tried to use my platform to raise awareness. I like to think that I'm doing my best.
Let's toast to you not being pregnant. If you're not pregnant, then we should. My goodness.
She says she didn't enjoy that moment.
Why do you even have time to write that email?
I don't know if I'm going to do this.
Yeah, you will.
This is the one thing that I have. It's like the one shred of
I'm
dignity
just
that
so
I have.
sorry. This has gone on way, 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 way too long. People have gotten away with murder. And that's what's happening.
Unstoppable, Ellen DeGeneres transformed daytime television into a joyful haven. Millions of people were saved by the fearless pioneer's laughter, rewriting the limits of what was conceivable in American culture. The brilliant soul behind The Ellen DeGeneres Show and the iconic voice of Dory stood tall as a giant of courage and charisma. Her talent, contributions, and courage were indisputable, and she bore the burden of breaking down barriers. However, the more she rose, the more deeply the wounds were pierced, the more loudly she was praised, the more harshly she was scrutinized. She became one of the few artists who was both hailed as a legend and demolished by the harsh criticism of a society that was not yet prepared to accept her reality. And even though she was almost destroyed by the storms of the past, the storm that surrounds her now at age 67 is more sinister, unrelenting, and like a shadow that won't go away.
Toxic to be around. That's how I would frame it.
Yeah.
Because she wouldn't look at you in the eye. She was very dismissive. Early on when I would pitch my segments and I would just open my mouth, I'm not even 5 seconds into my pitch, she would say, get to the point already. Get to the point. Come on, get to the point.
Together, we will discover what lies beyond the smile that once swept across America, and what continues to reverberate in the last chapter of a journey that is both glorious and tragic. If she ever made an impression on you, whether you like her or not, please leave a like as a way to remember a journey that was both bright and storm-torn. Some houses exude warmth, while others are as silent as a stone. And that quiet wasn't peace to Ellen DeGeneres. It was devastating. It was unkind. It was a silently bleeding wound. Ellen was born on January 26, 1958, in Metairie, Louisiana, into a modest middle-class family. Her mother, Betty, took care of the house, and her father, Elliot, worked in insurance. She was the youngest of 2 children, with an older brother, Vance, who would eventually pursue a career in entertainment. However, when her parents divorced in 1973, the typical family comfort broke down, and at the age of 15, she witnessed the collapse of her entire world. The family dispersed, with Ellen following her mother into a new marriage and a new home in Atlanta, Texas, and Vance remaining with their father.
You always wanted to do comedy?
No, I really didn't. Until I got on stage, until I was talked into it, because I didn't want to, do it until some friends said, we're having a benefit, we need to raise some money, and I don't even know what the benefit was for. It was like, I think somebody needed a new pair of jeans or something at the time. And I went on stage, and I don't even know what I did, but it was funny at the time. I loved it. It was just the greatest feeling, and it just fell in my lap. Everything just kept happening, and
Rather than providing protection, those walls concealed shadows and secrets that pressed against her tender heart until she was barely able to breathe. Ellen suffered a terrible betrayal as a teenager that would stay with her forever. A stepfather who violated the rules that shouldn't be broken with a child, betraying her trust from the very person who was supposed to keep her safe. No child should ever have to go through this. It was unkind. It was devastating. Additionally, it left her with scars that would last for decades. The timing added to the pain. With her body weak and her spirit burdened by illness, Betty, her mother, was fighting breast cancer and was unable to comprehend that her own husband could be the cause of her daughter's suffering. Desperate and broken, Ellen looked to her mother for support, for protection, and for a single voice to stand with her. However, her mother's disbelief was not due to a lack of love, but rather to the fact that the truth was too terrible and unimaginable for a woman who was already drowning in her own misery. That incredulity went beyond the actual betrayal, leaving Betty with a guilt that would follow her for years, and Ellen with the intolerable burden of loneliness. A tragic tale of two souls, a mother and a daughter, both broken by suffering and scarred by the cruelty of one man. Ellen would later admit that the agony had become ingrained in her very being. The hardest act she had ever done, she acknowledged, was learning to dance through life while crying inside. It was a tragic and bitter irony. She would one day be hailed by the world as a laughing lighthouse, but her early survival lessons were derived from fear, silence, and betrayed trust rather than happiness. Her teenage loneliness became intolerable. It was a cage made of pictures of her family that showed them smiling while chaos raged behind them. Too soon, Ellen realized that not all photos were accurate, and those unspoken scars turned into shadows that followed her into adulthood and followed her everywhere she went.
That whole fitness thing runs in my family, though, I think. That my grandmother started walking 5 miles a day when she was 60. She's 97 today, and we don't know where the hell she is. I'm kidding. We know where she is. She's in prison. But, I'm kidding again. You know, I kid a lot because I'm a comedian.
However, something surprising started to emerge from the ashes of that heartbreak. Humor, sharp, quick, and self-deprecating, emerged as a shield, her only weapon against the darkness that attempted to consume her, rather than as a hobby. Her laughter turned into a means of survival, defiance, and rebellion against cruelty.
I'm always thinking about these things because to me life is very precious. It's very special. We're here for that, done it.
Ellen sharpened her wit like armor on nights when tears threatened to crush her soul, turning silence into stories, betrayal into rhythm, and wounds into jokes that would one day make everyone laugh uncontrollably. This joy was a result of necessity rather than privilege. Her comedy has always been about escape, resiliency, and refusing to let cruelty define her. It was never just about amusement. Her early traumas molded, scarred, and almost permanently silenced her. Ellen DeGeneres, however, would not remain silent. Even though it had nearly been lost to the tragic shadows of her youth, she created a voice that the world would one day celebrate from the ashes of broken trust. A stage, a destiny where laughter would become more than just a means of survival, but her calling to the world was waiting to emerge from that pain. With only a bruised soul and an unyielding will to live, the girl who once carried shadows in silence entered adulthood. Ellen DeGeneres left the University of New Orleans in 1976 after just one semester, with a storm in her heart but no diploma in her hands. She went back to New Orleans, a city teeming with laughter and music, determined to forge her own route. However, it was a battleground for her to survive. Cabinets resounding empty, dignity slipping through her fingers, rent past due. Hunger and unpaid bills were as real to Ellen as the air she breathed, so she took any job she could find. As a law office secretary, she typed endlessly until her fingers hurt, folded endless stacks of clothes at JCPenney until her back hurt, painted murals with hands stained with paint that wouldn't clean, carried heavy trays through smoke-filled diners as a waitress, and poured drinks late into the night behind a bar where people laughed but never her.
I didn't even realize the internal homophobia and the shame that I was still dealing with. I thought, if I just say the words, I'm gay, if I just do that, that's going to be enough.
Each paycheck is a tenuous lifeline. Every shift was a battleground that made her soul stronger but also exhausted her body. A reminder that dreams are bled for, not given, is worked into every hour. Poverty, however, did more than simply test her, it shaped her. She learned to smile at strangers across counters while her stomach twisted in emptiness, to ration bread like treasure, to swallow hunger while saving coins for bus fare, and to stretch a few crumpled dollars over a week. A voice inside her whispered that she was meant for something bigger, even during those bone-weary days of endless labor, when her back hurt from carrying trays and her pockets jingled with nothing but loose change. She carried a battered notebook that was smeared with sweat and coffee, full of scrawled jokes, bits of ridiculousness, drawings of suffering that were passed off as humor, and seeds of a future that no one else could see. She would practice alone at night, her shadow against the wall like a second silent audience, in a small rented room with peeling walls and a flickering lamp that buzzed like a weary insect. She was the sole observer of a young woman transforming loneliness into rhythm, hunger into jokes, and heartbreak into laughter. She occasionally performed in front of a broken mirror and other times in front of her pet. Those were nights of heartbreaking isolation, when the silence of the room weighed more heavily than the work of the day, when dinner was only half a sandwich saved from work, and when the applause only existed in her mind. But she honed her sense of humor like a blade, cutting through hopelessness with wit and timing, confident that eventually everyone would be forced to pay attention. Every line she wrote and every joke she rehearsed was more than just a joke. It was defiance, tenacity, and survival. She was teaching herself self-control, timing, bravery, and endurance, all of which were developed in the furnace of hardship and during the nights when everyone else forgot her. However, she resisted forgetting who she was. By the early 1980s, Ellen was performing on the dark stages of New Orleans, smoky clubs, and dilapidated bars where people were impatient, there was little laughter, and failure was frequently paid in silence. Her style was different. She was quick, smart, and self-deprecating, but she wasn't polished or confident yet. She transformed loneliness into rhythm, scars into jokes, and uncertainties into humor. The room was occasionally half empty. At times no one would laugh, and she would carry coins that jingled like harsh reminders of her struggle as she walked home with tips that were hardly enough for rent. However, she persisted because every laugh was an act of defiance against the silence that had once attempted to destroy her, and every joke was an act of rebellion. Her perseverance, which attracted the attention of scouts looking for new talent, led to her breakthrough rather than chance. She was rumored to be the funniest person no one knew in New Orleans, and her name spread like a secret from club to club until it reached the ears of those who booked Johnny Carson's Tonight Show, the comedy equivalent of the Holy Grail. Then fate called in 1986. There was no greater honor or test for a young comedian. Legends were created on this stage, and Carson alone could determine who was deserving. Ellen entered the stage with shaky hands and a racing heart, but she also carried the scars of her childhood, the fortitude of her years of hunger, and the wit she had honed in a dark room by herself. Her performance was incisive, fluid, and disarming, and the turning point was when Johnny Carson himself, sporting that sardonic grin, invited her to sit with him on the couch and enter the hallowed area reserved for the most exceptional performers. Carson became the guardian of her future in that moment, the man who approved not only of her jokes, but also of her existence as a voice that America could no longer ignore. It was redemption written in laughter that night, not just a show. The girl whose voice could command a nation had once been silenced. The journey, the lonely young woman practicing to a broken mirror, the painter with paint-stained hands, the waitress balancing trays in smoky diners, was praised as much for the jokes as for the journey itself. Now, America was listening while standing under the brightest lights. Ellen DeGeneres was more than just a survivor after that night. She was a rising star who brought with her the unwavering belief that the most cutting tools of creation can be made from the deepest wounds. Every step of Ellen DeGeneres' ascent from the backrooms of smoky clubs to the glittering promise of primetime television by the mid-1990s was earned via years of arduous perseverance. She had been the comic whose witty timing turned silence into laughter, the guest who stole scenes on late-night stages, and she gradually established the credibility that eventually won her the unachievable, her own sitcom, just called Ellen. The tale of a girl who once scrawled jokes in a battered notebook and now commands the laughter of a nation was more than just a show. It was a coronation. For a brief instant, it appeared as though her long struggle had finally been rewarded by fate. But a crueler test was in store for fate. The incident involving the puppy that would leave her name etched in cultural history occurred in 1997. The words spoken by Ellen's character on screen reflected the secret she had been keeping for years. She was gay. Ellen herself made the decision to face the same reality off-screen. It was revolutionary. It was brave. It was the unvarnished truth of a woman eerie of concealment. It was frightening, though. Ellen was aware of the danger behind the cheers. Speaking her mind would mean risking her career, her reputation, and possibly everything she had worked so hard to achieve. The fallout was brutal, but the moment was electrifying. Conservative voices sharpened their blades, sponsors fled, advertisers disappeared, and ratings plummeted. Once celebrating headlines became mean, derisive, and vindictive. Ellen was canceled in 1998, not because she was untalented or unhumorous, but because the world was not yet prepared for a woman with the courage to live freely. It was incredibly expensive. One of America's biggest stars, Ellen suddenly became a pariah, rejected by Hollywood, and forced to navigate the wilderness of her own truth. It was devastating. It was cruel. The silence that had plagued her early years reappeared, this time heightened by a society that opted to punish instead of celebrate. Nevertheless, the seed of a larger legacy was planted amid that destruction. Ellen's downfall was not a result of failure, but rather of the sacrifice required of pioneers and the cost of authenticity in a society still bound by discrimination. However, Ellen was not the type of woman to remain buried in silence. She had already made it through too much. She refused to give up even though rejection had broken many before her. She rebuilt her life one painful step at a time, doing voiceover work, performing on small stages, and doing everything she could to show the world that she still had something to offer. She battled her way back to the stage that would change everything, The Ellen DeGeneres Show, in 2003, like a phoenix rising from ashes. Ellen turned daytime television into a cathedral of joy where dancing, kindness, and laughter became her signature. What started as a risk by networks unsure of her appeal turned into a cultural phenomenon. She dominated daytime for almost 20 years, winning numerous Daytime Emmy Awards and establishing a place where millions of people could find inspiration, solace, and escape. Her voice reverberated well beyond her studio's boundaries. Her portrayal of Dory in Pixar's Finding Nemo in 2003 was so well-liked that she returned to the role in Finding Dory over 10 years later. She established herself as a reliable host for the most glitzy entertainment events, directing the Emmys, Grammys, and Academy Awards with effortless wit and charm. Her journey also came full circle in 2016 when President Barack Obama awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, for her talent, courage, impact, and unwavering spirit. The irony was astounding. She was almost destroyed by honesty in 1997, but by 2016, that same honesty had elevated her to the status of a national treasure. Her legacy was built on the truth that once cost her everything, serving as a lighthouse for millions of people who felt invisible, unheard, and unaccepted. After enduring the storm of rejection, Ellen became one of America's most adored characters, a living example of how perseverance can turn adversity into success. Her path from cancellation to celebration, from silence to presidential honor, was not merely the trajectory of a career. Rather, it was the trajectory of a life that dared to be true to herself at all costs. Ellen DeGeneres made her mark not only in entertainment but also in the hearts of a country that at last learned to embrace her honesty with each laugh and tear she shed. For Ellen DeGeneres, the storm that would alter everything started with a tweet, but storms frequently start with whispers. On March 20th, 2020, comedian Kevin T. Porter shared a message that appeared to be a joke but had the impact of a spark in dry grass as the world sat in lockdown, yearning for solace and connection. "We all need a little kindness right now," he wrote. As Ellen DeGeneres frequently discusses, in addition, she is infamously one of the cruelest individuals on the planet. If you reply with your tales, I'll make a donation to the LA Food Bank. During quarantine, the internet was restless and hungry for stories, so it exploded. Hundreds and then thousands of people responded, including baristas, waitresses, viewers, and even former cast members. The smiling person who had built an empire on kindness was depicted in story after story in a way that was startling. Some remembered being warned not to look Ellen in the eye. Others spoke of distance, coldness, and even punishment for small transgressions. It didn't matter if all the stories were true or not. The fracture that showed up in her picture was what counted. The woman who had concluded each episode by urging everyone to be kind to one another was now charged with being the exact opposite. Furthermore, that contradiction was more profound than any one rumor. A ripple turned into a tidal wave. The old clips came back. Interviews that had previously been written off as awkward comedy were now played back as proof of something more sinister. Mariah Carey was taken by surprise. Dakota Johnson gently pushes back, Taylor Swift averting her eyes. Once laughing fans now winced, viewing the scene with new eyes. The internet, which had previously served as her playground, now served as her jury as the phrase "replace Ellen" gained popularity on various platforms. Then the tipping point arrived. BuzzFeed News released an investigation on July 16, 2020, which turned the rumors into news stories. 10 former workers described a toxic workplace that included rules that made employees feel invisible, intimidation, and fear. Even longtime fans of the show were shaken by the most shocking accusations made against 3 senior producers who were accused of misconduct. Warner Media declared an internal investigation within a few days. Ellen's kingdom of kindness was already damaged, but the executives were quickly taken out. Ellen took aim at the controversy when the new season debuted that September. She said, "I take responsibility for what happens at my show, under the bright lights, the words that once held such power. The Ellen DeGeneres show is this. Ellen DeGeneres is who I am." She expressed regret and acknowledged that the workplace behind her smiling brand had failed to uphold the principles she had long advocated. Some saw it as a humble moment. Others found the words to be hollow, tempered by awkward jokes that didn't belong. Although it was acknowledged, the apology did not make things better. Too much damage had already been done. More than 1 million ratings dropped. Sponsors withdrew within months, and the public trust that had once been her most valuable asset was depleted more quickly than it could be replenished. While devoted voices like Katy Perry and Kevin Hart supported her, others like Brad Garrett and Leah Thompson attested to the veracity of the stories. America's most joyous haven of laughter was now enshrouded in a shadow from which it was unable to emerge. Ellen declared that season 19 would be her final season in May 2021. She clarified that the show was no longer a challenge after almost 20 years. However, her words were overshadowed by the timing. The announcement seemed more like a surrender to those who had witnessed her transition from late-night performances to daytime royalty. A woman compelled to leave the stage that had once served as her haven. The guest from her first show, Jennifer Aniston, made a comeback to complete the circle when the last episode aired in May 2022. Instead of being a victory lap, it felt more like a somber farewell. The studio erupted in cheers. Words of appreciation and tears were exchanged. As though everyone in the room knew that this ending was not written by triumph, but by storm. There was still tension and silence beneath the celebration. Ellen grinned, her laughter tinged with fatigue, but the brightness that had once characterized her appeared to have faded. That stage had been her heartbeat, her haven, and her second home for almost 20 years. Not because she wanted to, but because she was unable to outrun the shadow that had fallen over it, she was now bidding it farewell. Thus, an era came to an end in the fog of contradiction rather than the flame of victory she had once imagined. The Ellen DeGeneres show transformed daytime television, brought happiness to millions, and ingrained kindness into society. However, in its last chapter, it served as a reminder of how brittle legacies really are, how doubt can undo decades of work, how the gap between image and reality can turn praise into doubt. It was a heartbreak that went far beyond headlines or ratings for Ellen. It was witnessing the very trust she had established fall apart before her very eyes, brick by brick, joke by joke, and kindness by kindness. The stage that had once crowned her was now a mirror's, reflecting her darkest shadow as well as her brightest light. It's devastating. It is humble. Above all, though, it is human. The good that Ellen had done was not undone by her fall, and the suffering that some claimed they had experienced was not justified. It brought to light a reality that is all too frequently overlooked. Nobody, not even those hailed as superhuman, is capable of carrying perfection. And maybe the cruelest irony of all was that the words she had said at the conclusion of each show, "Be kind to one another," had become both her greatest gift and her greatest burden. This was the deepest wound she had yet to experience after overcoming cultural backlash, professional exile, and childhood shadows. How about love? Love was never kind to Ellen. Honesty was measured in wounds on the battlefield. She walked onto the volcano red carpet in 1997 while holding actress Anne Heche's hand right before she revealed her truth to the world in the now famous puppy episode. Two women standing together without apologizing and smiling was all it took to ignite America. It was more than romance. It was rebellion. It was bravery woven into the delicate tapestry of love. However, the cost was brutal. Hollywood flinched, its doors shutting one by one. Ellen, who was already struggling with the fallout from coming out, saw her career slip away from her as sponsors withdrew and contracts vanished. The phone that used to ring with offers was now silent. The consequences were equally harsh for Anne, a family that could not accept her truth, tabloids that circled like vultures, and a business that characterized their love as scandal rather than human. Beneath the glossy pictures of two women grinning valiantly, there was a tempest of rejection, fear, and tiredness. Under the harsh scrutiny of an unprepared world, what ought to have been a celebration of authenticity turned into a crucifixion. Their love, which blazed brightly until 2000, was gradually smothered by the weight of a society that penalized them for having the audacity to be openly themselves. Neither woman was hurt when it was over. With the familiar scar of being punished for speaking the truth, Ellen retreated into silence once more. The road, however, became darker for Anne. She staggered through turbulent years. The harsh scrutiny of the media exposed her struggles with mental health. What ought to have been private conflicts turned into a public show. Every slip-up was magnified, every crack examined. Then, in 2022, the tragedy that would silence her forever struck. Anne died at the age of 53 in a violent and fatal car accident. It was a harsh conclusion to a life that had already seen more upheavals than most people could handle. Her passing made headlines for many. It served as a somber reminder to those who recalled her love for Ellen of how brittle and expensive authenticity had been during that time. What started out as a love that dared to shine turned into a story filled with wounds and ended in a silence that no one could ever overcome. In retros, pecked, their love was sacrifice rather than failure. Because it was a love that was ahead of its time, it was subject to the cruelty of the day. To allow others to love more freely in the future, they paid with their reputation, their career, and their peace of mind. The harshest reality, perhaps, is that what cost them almost everything would serve as the cornerstone for the liberties that others now enjoy. Their story was about more than just two women in love. It was also about the wounds that honesty left behind and the unrelenting weight of a society that was not prepared for it. In 2001, Ellen found friendship with photographer and actress Alexandra Hedison after her heart yearned for stability and a love that didn't feel like it was on the front lines of a cultural conflict. Alexandra appeared to have a softer perspective on the world and was a serene, contemplative artist who captured moments of life through her lens. Along with her, Ellen found a more peaceful chapter following the storm, a home full of lengthy talks, creative exchanges, and seemingly everyday moments rather than news reports and scrutiny. Ordinary was a miracle in and of itself to a woman who had survived fire. Their 3-year relationship was characterized by love and a quest for normalcy. They established routines, enjoyed little pleasures, and worked to create a personal haven away from the bustle of Hollywood. But beneath the silence, fissures appeared. Ellen was still recovering from the wounds of her highly publicized love affair with Anne, and she was still troubled by the burden of rebuilding her career while being watched closely. Even though Alexandra was steady, she frequently fell in love with a woman whose spirit was restless, torn between a desire for something more, something that could inspire and heal, and a thankfulness for the quiet. The strains of their disparate lives, Alexandra drawn to a more private artistic life, while Ellen remained in the spotlight, slowly increased the gap between them. What had started out as a haven began to feel more like a stopgap, a port of call rather than a permanent residence. By 2004, they had quietly parted ways, not with scandal or resentment, but with the quiet sadness of two people who loved each other very much, but were unable to reconcile their needs and their contributions. In retrospect, Alexandra stood for change, the gap between grief and recovery, the hurdle Ellen had to get past before entering the forever love that was waiting for her. Alexandra was the calm that allowed her to breathe and remember that love could be tender, even if it wasn't permanent, whereas Anne had been the fire that tried her bravery. Even though their paths diverged, that chapter was still crucial, because it helped Ellen recognize and accept the love that would soon help her weather the biggest storms of her life. Portia de Rossi. Ellen DeGeneres was 46 years old in 2004 and had been through storms that would have broken many. She had endured both public and private wounds, passed through Alexandra Hedison's precarious haven, and lost a love that burned too brightly in Anne Heche. She was tired, bruised, and nearly certain that she would never be able to have permanence. She met 31-year-old Portia de Rossi in the midst of her exhaustion, and their encounter not only changed her life, but also saved it. The sophisticated Australian actress Portia, who starred in Arrested Development and Ally McBeal, wore her own hidden scars. Beneath the fame and beauty, she struggled with depression, eating disorders, and the crippling burden of concealing who she really was in a cruelly critical industry. She had learned, like Ellen, to break in silently while smiling for the cameras. It was more than just attraction when their eyes locked, it was recognition. After being beaten by expectations, two women finally found a mirror in one another that understood but did not pass judgment. And then something extraordinary occurred. Ellen's laughter came from joy instead of defense for the first time in years. Portia also found a love that saw her as a soul rather than just an image. The simple miracle of waking up next to someone who made the world feel safe, long walks where conversation flowed into silence more consoling than applause, and peaceful breakfasts shared in sunny kitchens were all examples of their days together being more than just companionship. They were healing. In response to Ellen's statement that Portia made me feel more loved than I ever imagined possible, Portia characterized Ellen as her soulmate and the rock that helped her weather her storms. They bonded instantly but purposefully, driven by a strong desire for the truth rather than impulsive behavior. They made the decision to refuse to apologize and walk hand in hand into the light in 2005. Their love was an act of rebellion in a Hollywood still bound by whispers. It was dangerous, even dangerous. But it was honest, and the only thing either of them had left to offer was honesty. The world started to change slowly. They took advantage of the brief opening of California's marriage equality laws in 2008 by holding a small ceremony at their Beverly Hills home. The rooms were filled with warmth rather than glitz, with family members hugging, friends wiping away tears, and laughter blending with the sound of vows uttered in shaky voices. Ellen, who was 50 years old at the time, was glowing with amazement that a promise she had previously believed was finally coming to pass. After years of being banished from herself, 35-year-old Portia stepped into a safe harbor with a calmness that she had long been denied. They had more than just words in their vows. They were declarations, wounds that were healed into hope, and scars that were healed into promises. Ellen vowed to stand as resolutely in silence as she would in cheers, to love and to defend. Portia promised not only to stay, but also to recover and reveal herself completely, fearlessly, and without disguise. It was more than just two women getting married when they kissed to seal their vows. It was a victory forged out of decades of discrimination and a turning point in history. Their home was filled with happiness that evening, with flowers strewn all over the tables, soft music playing, and friends raising a glass to a love that had remained unbreakable. Portia described the day as the first time she felt fully whole, while Ellen later said she felt like the luckiest woman alive. As living examples of how authenticity, despite its high cost, can also be liberating, they were no longer fugitives of love, but its pioneers. And that love can occasionally be a public revolution in addition to a personal salvation. However, love is never without its challenges, even if it is predetermined. The 2008 vows did not absolve Portia of her personal struggles with mental health and self-esteem, nor did they alleviate the crippling pressures that celebrity placed on Ellen. There were evenings when the hospital hallways were their only common area, when hushed assurances took the place of laughter, and when uncertainty threatened to reappear like an old foe. But unlike the previous loves, Ellen didn't withdraw into quiet or seclusion. She remained. She made the decision to choose love both in the shadow of fear and in the light of applause. Portia, in turn, turned into her fulcrum, the unwavering, steady hand that held Ellen's when the world's roar became too loud. In 2020, when Ellen's legacy faltered under the weight of controversy and the internet glared at her, that loyalty was put to the ultimate test. Sponsors fled as headlines were ridiculed. Once cheering, millions now questioned. Portia, however, did not recoil. In private as well as in public, she remained steadfast, her quiet power more powerful than any storm. She posted 4 words that became a lifeline in a moment that broke through the chaos. I support Ellen. It was more than just a proclamation. It was a renewed vow, evidence that the ties of love remained strong even as the world's trust crumbled. Portia has made me feel more loved than I ever thought possible, Ellen later admitted, when she referred to Portia as her soulmate. Ellen and Portia are still inseparable nearly 20 years after they first met. Art, animals, and gardens abound in their homes, which range from Montecito to Beverly Hills and now include a retreat in the English countryside. Every room serves as a canvas for the life they created together. They have exchanged headlines for the sound of trees rustling and red carpets for peaceful mornings. Ellen, who used to practice jokes by herself in a broken mirror, now wakes up next to the woman who made her feel better. Portia, who once starved herself due to expectations, now flourishes with a partner who values her as a person and not just an image. Despite its flaws, their love endures. It has withstood criticism, disease, time, and the ebb and flow of celebrity. It has transformed fear into family, silence into solidarity, and suffering into collaboration. Portia is the harbor, the last stable light where a restless soul found peace. If Anne was the fire that tried Ellen's resolve, and Alexandra the bridge that helped her get through heartbreak. The biggest victory for Ellen, after decades of outrunning storms and chasing laughter, was never a show, an award, or even a legacy. It was love. The kind that endures when the cheers stop, that stays when the cameras stop, that mends wounds that the outside world cannot see. She discovered not only a companion in Portia de Rossi, but also the indisputable evidence that even the most broken lives can be restored. Their story is not just one of survival. It is also one of perseverance, redemption, and the rarest miracle of all, finding a place in someone else's heart. There are storms that develop gradually under the guise of time passing, and there are storms that break suddenly. The storms were no longer news stories or scandals for Ellen DeGeneres, who is now in her late 60s and approaching 70. Her body was gradually turning against her. She first talked about it publicly in 2023 when she was 65 years old, revealing what she had long kept to herself: osteoporosis, a condition that weakens bones to the point where a simple slip could result in a fracture. Arthritis, which swells and stiffens her joints, making mornings a struggle before the day even started. And the twin mental burdens of obsessive disorder, OCD, with its incessant rituals, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, which pull her in different directions and make even the most basic tasks exhausting. She admitted, "I always thought I was just restless. But now I realize that my body can't always keep up with my brain, which never stops running." It was an uncommon instance of openness without the gimmick of humor, where sincerity was more important than jokes. And it didn't stop there. Ellen disclosed that the effects of aging had worsened as she grew closer to 70. Sharp flare-ups of arthritis in her hands and knees, persistent back pain from osteoporosis pressing on her spine, and fatigue that persisted regardless of how much she slept. These were not fleeting annoyances. They served as constant companions and daily reminders that the body, despite its renown, ages. The betrayal of her own bones and joints was the cruelest irony for a woman who was once known for her energy, dancing, running across stages, and filling rooms with laughter. It was not a dramatic pain. It was ingrained in every day, unrelenting and uncompromising. Mornings were no longer easy. Instead, she had to stop at the edge of the bed and take slow breaths before she dared to get out of bed because her joints were so stiff. Hands that used to move fluidly, adding flair to punchlines, now shuddered under the pressure of lifting a cup or opening a jar. Her knees and hips protested sharply at even the most basic walk, serving as a constant reminder that her body was no longer the limitless powerhouse it once was. Nights were punishing in their own way. Sleep was broken by sharp pains, thoughts kept repeating, and the mind refused to stop worrying. This betrayal by her own body was more painful than any critic's words for a woman who was once enthralled with movement and loved for her seemingly limitless energy. Yes, she had been scarred by scandal and fame, but age had humbled her in ways that no other thing could, forcing her to face her vulnerability head-on. Ellen did not, however, crumble under it. She made the decision to adjust and face decline head-on. Therapy was now a lifeline rather than an option. She openly discussed rearranging her days to fit softer rhythms, measured walks rather than jogs, slow stretches instead of dances, meditation to quiet her mind's restless spirals, and the guts to turn down the demands that once characterized her profession. "Therapy is a mirror I can finally look into without making a joke," she stated. Her public persona was stripped away by this admission, exposing the human being, one who was finally learning to be kind to herself, rather than the entertainer. Portia evolved into more than just a partner during this time. She took on the role of protector for Ellen's survival. She redesigned their home into a haven of comfort and healing, matched her steps to Ellen's slowing pace, and offered her arm when joints threatened to give way. Rigid chairs gave way to softer ones. Meals were designed to support brittle bones. The design of the garden paths encouraged soft movement. Ellen smiled in interviews with a genuine and humorous smile. "Portia forces me to move when I don't want to and eat when I don't want to. She does it with love too. That wasn't just a joke, it was the truth." In their hands, what could have been years of decline turned into years of cooperation, perseverance, and nurturing. These silent conflicts strengthened Portia's allegiance, which had been evident in 2020 when Ellen's reputation was tarnished. She didn't require big announcements. Her presence made her voice more audible. She sat quietly next to Ellen during therapy, held her hand during checkups, and reminded her in 100 little ways that love could endure scandal, time, and even the body's own betrayal. Instead of fleeing, they made the decision to return to England, trading in the thunderous applause for the sound of birdsong and the glare of red carpets for the peace and quiet of garden paths. Performance was no longer a factor in every step they took together. It was about advancement, survival, and unity. "I used to think success was being everywhere," Ellen admitted in 2024, her voice softer but more steady than before. "Success now consists of simply getting out of bed, stretching, taking a stroll with Portia, and being thankful." Her greatest wisdom was contained in that silent redefinition. It is devastating to watch her slow down and witness a body that was once so active falter. She now addresses anyone who has experienced the gradual betrayal of aging and who has gazed in the mirror and seen frailty staring back. So there is inspiration in that heartbreak. Her story is not one of failure, but of perseverance, the grace required to persevere, and the most precious gift of all, a partner whose love transforms weakness into strength. Thus, Ellen's later years are characterized by her testimonies rather than by scandal or even humor. There will always be storms, the body will deteriorate, and the mind will wander. But even the harshest realities of aging can be endured with integrity, compassion, and the unwavering support of love. The last act is no longer about laughter for the woman who once made the world laugh. It is about surviving with grace and demonstrating that the purest form of victory is kindness, when it is directed inward and shared with the one who remains. Ellen DeGeneres learned to accept taking things more slowly by 2024. She would not, however, disappear in silence. Her voice still had power, even if her body was no longer designed for constant movement, and she decided to use it one final time. She made a comeback to the stage that year with a Netflix special titled For Your Approval and a farewell stand-up tour called Ellen's Last Stand. She said at the beginning, "Yes, I'll talk about it." Audiences leaned in for truth, not just jokes, for the first time in years. Part comedy, part confession, and part farewell ensued. Tales of TMTs, brutality of celebrity, observations on growing older, acknowledgments of her shortcomings, and bursts of the razor-sharp wit that once made her unstoppable. As though everyone in the room realized that this was not just entertainment, but rather the final chapter of a woman closing her own book, there was a hint of melancholy in the laughter. Ellen refrained from chasing another spotlight when the curtain finally came down. Rather, she and Porsche retreated from the spotlight of Hollywood and opted for the peaceful embrace of the English countryside. Their Cotswolds home, encircled by undulating hills, narrow lanes, and stone cottages that date back hundreds of years, had transformed into a haven far from red carpets by 2025, when Ellen was getting close to 70. Instead of studio applause, mornings came with birdsong floating through open windows and mist curling over fields. The sound of gardening, the rustle of Portia's art book pages, and the presence of cherished animals that roamed freely throughout their property served as indicators of the passing of the day. Despite leaving the entertainment industry, Ellen never gave up her love of homes. She kept purchasing and renovating homes with Portia, turning them into light-filled, minimalistic retreats before selling them. The frantic game of flipping multi-million-dollar properties in Montecito and Beverly Hills had slowed down to a more subdued endeavor that was more about creating beauty than making money. The size of her empire was still astounding, though. She now has an estimated net worth of $450 million, which is enormous wealth by any standards, having purchased and sold more than 20 opulent homes over the years. The irony, however, is harsh. Her bones hurt, her joints are stiff, and her mind is a restless storm that no amount of luck can calm. From the outside, her life appears to be almost idyllic. Blossoming gardens, rooms brimming with art, and a Porsche never far away. Ellen, however, is aware of the price of her journey. In more private moments, she acknowledges that being famous made her laugh and feel lonely, and that sometimes her wit's sharpest jokes concealed her deepest pains. Like shadows on a bright wall, the controversies that once threatened to destroy her legacy continue to linger. Additionally, she is forced to confront regrets she cannot change as she ages, including the relationships she lost, the trust she lost, and the years when ambition overshadowed gentleness. But love has persevered in the face of fragility. She finds that therapy helps her deal with the constant pull of OCD and ADHD. When her arthritis demands stillness, she keeps her body moving with gentle walks with Portia, and her strongest stronghold is now the marriage she once believed was impossible. The peaceful evenings spent with Portia in their garden are the most treasured of all Ellen's possessions, including art collections, expansive estates, and millions in the bank. The world was reduced to 2 hands, 2 voices, and 2 storm-resistant hearts. It is a life that is both admirable and humble. Great wealth weighed against the indisputable fact of death, public success overshadowed by personal regret. For Ellen DeGeneres, England is a place of reckoning rather than escape, a place where she can finally take a break, relax, and realize that her legacy is not based on wealth or celebrity, but rather on having the guts to continue living a life that is true to herself even after the spotlight has faded. There is no greater contrast. Her quick wit, flawless timing, and fearless originality turned comedy from smoky club stages to living rooms across the country. She was the same woman who once stood at the Saint-Étienne, of American pop culture. She transformed daytime television into a cathedral of dancing, laughter, and giving for 19 seasons, transforming viewers into friends in her orbit rather than just viewers. She hosted the Emmys, Grammys, and Oscars, commanding the largest stages in the world. She gave life to Dory, Pixar's iconic Blue Tang, with a combination of incisive intelligence and effortless charm that few could match. Her voice became ingrained in the collective consciousness as a representation of purity and hope. And it was not only her humor that earned her the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2016, but also her cultural influence, the unique capacity to change people's perceptions, broaden perspectives, and rethink what was possible for someone who dared to be herself. However, this was also the woman who faced terrible criticism, including the fall of her sitcom following her 1997 comeout and the 2020 storm that called into question the very kindness upon which she had based her business. Although Ellen DeGeneres' legacy is not flawless or unblemished, it's possible that her flaws are what make her accomplishments and talent even more amazing. She was brilliant because she refused to let the darkness dim her light, not because life was easy. To judge her life based on perfection would be to overlook the reality of her situation. Her greatness came from repeatedly daring to live in the open, even at excruciating costs, rather than from being perfect. She taught the world in 1997 that while authenticity can be punished, it can also permanently change culture. She demonstrated during her talk show years that visibility, generosity, and laughter could reach millions of homes and ease the pain of loneliness. Even the most admired people make mistakes. Legacies are not carved in marble but are stitched from both triumphs and regrets. Kindness must be lived, not just spoken. And she exposed something more difficult, uncomfortable, but profoundly necessary in her later struggles. A pristine portrait is not a legacy. Near her retirement, a critic wrote, "It's a canvas of starts and restarts, failures and grace." Perhaps the best way to honor Ellen is to acknowledge the bravery of someone who continued to walk through the shadows in her story, rather than to ignore or excuse them. The reminder that storms will come, bodies will falter, and reputations will bend, but honesty, resiliency, and love can still carry us home, is something more timeless for those who once found solace in her laughter. If her voice ever filled the quiet of a lonely afternoon, whether you admired her or not, please leave a note of gratitude below and tell us what aspect of her journey most resonates with you. The storms, the laughter, the tenacity, or the way she kept returning to the stage.
I could think of you of starting a party at like midnight. Like what time will it go till?
That's a different type of party, though.
Now what? Not the wife of DJ Twitch who exposed Diddy and Ellen for dragging him out and making her an accomplice? 2024 got off to a great start, and it appears to be ending on a high note. DJ Twitch's wife, Allison Holker, recently shocked the internet by disclosing some shocking information about her husband's true fate. As it happens, Twitch learned of Ellen's involvement in Diddy's wrongdoings and quickly silenced him before he could speak. There were some unsettling rumors that Ellen attended Diddy's free call parties before he passed away. She reportedly even attempted to enlist Twitch in the ROFs, but after he made it apparent that he was not doing so, he was discovered dead under suspicious circumstances, and all the evidence suggests that foul play was involved in his demise. Before all of this chaos, Ellen and Diddy were very close, and rumors have it that Ellen was invited to all of those Frio parties. She recruited people for him in exchange, and he became one of the most invited celebrities on her show, making over 17 appearances. Do you all realize how much she must adore him to make the 17-time effort to invite him?
Thank you.
Oh, look. You're welcome. That was...
This is where things start to get interesting because Diddy and Ellen openly discussed the free coughs in one of the episodes. Diddy went so far as to mention that parties are typically hosted on the second and third floors of certain hotels, to which Ellen retorted that she was already aware of this. She soon realized she had slipped, though, and said she was aware of the parties because he frequently raps about them in his songs. When this was not tolerated, people began to investigate Ellen and everything she had been up to over the years. At the same time, a video of her becoming visibly agitated and running to her car after being questioned about Diddy's alleged sexual assault went viral.
Ellen, were you surprised by the allegations about P. Diddy? Did that surprise you about P. Diddy? He's been on your show many times.
People also mentioned the death of her ex-girlfriend, Hesh, who mysteriously passed away shortly after trying to expose her, as if that weren't already shady enough. And here's the thing, folks. She passed away on August 11th, 2022, nearly 4 months before DJ Twitch was discovered dead. She stated in a podcast a few weeks before her death that she was the one who left Ellen because Ellen had sold her soul to the industry, despite the fact that many people believed Ellen was the one who ended their relationship. She claimed that at one point, Ellen was solely concerned with increasing her income, regardless of the consequences. She claimed, "I ended our relationship because she wanted a lot of money, I wanted to find love, and she wanted $60 billion. I wish you luck. We will never meet our forks. We will be farther apart the longer we continue on this." She also claimed in the same podcast that Ellen had tried to get her placed in a mental health facility and had worked extra hard to get her banned after she left.
Every single truth that I spoke, I was hit more, buried more, or despised more, and then had calculated me down.
And guess what? Anne suffered multiple second-degree burns throughout her body in a deadly car accident a few months after exposing Ellen and putting her on blast. Before first responders arrived on the scene, she was trapped in her burning car for 30 minutes. She eventually passed away, and her autopsy revealed that she had a broken sternum, burns, and smoke inhalation. She had previously used benzoyl, but not at the time of the crash, according to the hospital admission report. DJ Twitch, who served as the DJ for Ellen's show, also passed away inexplicably 4 months later. Twitch reportedly stayed at the Oak Tree Motel, which was only a 15-minute walk from his home. Allison called him multiple times after realizing he wasn't home, but he didn't pick up. She was alarmed by this and promptly reported it to the police. The supervisor of the motel where Twitch had checked in called the federal authorities to report that they had discovered Twitch's body in the restroom under suspicious circumstances after news of his disappearance spread. For instance, it was said that he left no notes when he was discovered dead, but TMZ later conducted a covert investigation and discovered that he had left one. What else are the feds lying about if they lied about this? To make things worse, just days before he passed away, Twitch's best friend, Tadri Hall, with whom he used to confide about everything, seemed to imply that Ellen was involved in Twitch's demise when he claimed that Twitch had some behind-the-scenes problems with Ellen that were truly stressing him out.
When he was on Ellen and Ellen was being canceled, people were looking at him saying, "Why are you supporting this woman?" And I think that is just a lot of pressure. Human beings are not designed to handle that much pressure. And when I was talking about my experience, his face was like, I know. And he was just like, it's a lot. It's a lot.
And here's the thing, folks. Twitch's wife, Allison, apparently knows exactly what Ellen and Diddy are accused of doing to him. But she chose to keep quiet and move on because she wants her children to be safe. As a result, in order to protect her children, Allison had to move and sell the home she and Twitch shared. Allison requested that a court grant her half of Twitch's estate in a spousal property petition she filed a few weeks after his passing. When they got married in 2013, she says, Twitch didn't have many assets. On the day of the marriage, the deceased Twitch had only valuable personal belongings. On the day of the marriage, he had no money. According to the filing, Twitch and Allison have not entered into any written agreements that would divide the total value of the community property in a non-prorated manner. She returned a few months later and requested that the court grant her half of Twitch's assets, along with any future royalties he might receive from all of his investments in Step Up and So You Think You Can Dance. She also went on to purchase a new home for $5 million after selling the one she and Twitch shared for $3.8 million. Allison is obviously afraid for her life and is making every effort to protect herself. It's crucial to remember that these are all merely conjectures, but a lot of research has been done, and soon we will know the truth about what happened to Twitch and whether Ellen and Diddy were truly involved. Like everyone else, there were opinions. One person stated, "As soon as I saw Ellen and Diddy aligned, I immediately thought he saw something he shouldn't have or wanted out, and they eliminated him." According to someone else, Twitch was so kind and innocent that he let Ellen put him in a precarious situation. I knew he was done when he said goodbye on Ellen's last show because he was revealed some internal secrets. Let's offer up prayers for justice for the bereaved families and for the victims of high-profile crimes in Hollywood. This is the devil's job. Let's pray for world peace as well. Now, though, I would like your opinions. Do you believe his wife truly knows about the alleged involvement of Ellen and Diddy in Twitch's death, which is why she moved? Please share your opinions in the space provided below, and remember to click here to view this additional extremely disorganized video.